Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I hope everyone is doing well. I think I'm doing pretty well myself. I'm doing quite well, in fact. Feeling healthy, feeling happy, and glad for that. Let's see. I was thinking, speaking about happiness. Speaking of happiness, I thought that I think that I want to speak a little bit about the connection between happiness and exercise. It is a deep connection, and probably biological in origin. I can imagine that that through history, our evolutionary history, that exercise was key to our surviving on the planet. I've heard the phrase that stated that humans are like the sharks of the savannah, and that's something that stuck with me. Um, I appreciate that. I think that humans were made to move. That in the past, and even in the recent past, like within the last 100 years or so, people have really had to exercise to obtain to work and obtain food. Obtaining food has not been a trivial thing. In order to get the energy needed to support our huge brains, we definitely need reliable food sources, and that takes work, particularly on a planet filled with lots of scarcity. And so it takes work. And it always has taken work, except for today. Like in the last 100 years or so, particularly like in the last 50 years, food has been a lot easier to come by, and it's kind of messing up the equation, so to speak. And there are true impacts to our happiness. Inactivity is a bear, really. And it's kind of funny how our attitudes have had to shift over the years. From, I think I can imagine a time when, um, you know, working for food was so challenging that it became virtuous. Uh, uh, to I'm sure there was virtue around working for food, and just that was in the cultural mindset. I mean, that's how people survived, right, through the millennia. Um, and in fact, I'm sure there was always dreams of like stopping the work whenever that might happen. And this idea, this cultural concept of retirement came up at least as a possibility, in the early 20th century. And there was various forms of laws created to make it possible for some. And a lot of people look forward to that time because inactivity, I think, was definitely the exception and not the rule. And I think there was kind of there was a romanticism around inactivity, and that is the thing that wealthy people do, and that it's a select few that are able to be inactive. And there's a lot of that mentality that persists even today. And a lot of people, I mean, there are a lot of people who are like saving up as much money as they can using fire. I think it's financially independent, retire early movement, the fire movement. And that's admirable in many respects. It takes a lot of self control to do something like that. And I applaud those people who do that. And I'm sure that not, I'm sure they all have differing reasons, but and I'm not necessarily saying that they necessarily are looking forward to a time of inactivity, but there's definitely having a sense of relief that comes with, say, achieving a state of fire. And you can definitely choose what you want to do. And I'm not saying that that's not a desirable state to be in. Indeed, I would hope that everyone in the world would eventually have the ability to, um, work if they wished. And I think that would be a wonderful outcome. It's funny how that's paired in culture, like our meme space, how that's paired with inactivity, but it doesn't have to be, certainly. And a lot of people recognize this, of course. Um, in fact, there are a lot of people who retire and are even more active than they were when they were working. I mean, here's the thing about work. There's lots of different kinds of jobs out there too. There's desk jobs, and then there's quite active blue collar work where you're on your knees all day, or scrubbing stuff, or doing skilled labor. Um, Work can be a source of activity and a source of inactivity. So, I mean, I won't generalize, but to some extent, I think retirement is viewed by some as at least where the possibility of being inactive is, well, it's a possibility, right? And because it's needed, especially as human beings grow old, it's not clear whether people are able to would be able to sustain, in all cases, certainly, um, a very active lifestyle because of disability and age and degradations in senses of balance, say. Um, yeah, so there's definitely and this need for inactivity, this natural need as people approach end of life, those needs can change. They can be they're very variable. Sometimes the changes happen rapidly, maybe after an accident. Sometimes they're very gradual as ability. For some, it gets taken away from them, just sort of like a friction effect where people just get slower and slower and slower as they move along in the world. So, and then, there, I no doubt, are periods where people recover from injury, and then also experience periods of being very healthy in their very old age, and that's wonderful too. My I really appreciate. I'm sure those people appreciate when that kind of thing happens, and so that's wonderful. But that whole end of life situation is it's unpredictable. It's kind of unpredictable how people might end up, and so it's just not clear. And so human beings, being what they are, they want to play it safe sometimes and spend a lot of time in the rocking chair or whatever. And wouldn't it be great for that to be a real possibility? And it is for some, but not for everybody, of course. And but it's also, I think, true that at least for some, the inactivity can be a challenge. Sometimes people need a purpose, and this is just for a subset of folks. And I know they're challenged when it comes to retirement. They're not quite sure what to do with themselves, or maybe they know what to do, but the activities they choose are low energy activities. And it's these are facts that people wrestle with every day. And I guess my point overall is that life can be unpredictable, and whether a person chooses a more or less active lifestyle is certainly their choice. And retirement, I think in general, people have the idea that it'd be nice to get some time to relax. Really, I mean, really, if people didn't have to work, maybe they wouldn't necessarily. And if they didn't have to be as active as they were, maybe they wouldn't necessarily be as active. And I can totally relate to a lot of that. I mean, here's the thing: as human beings, we are all about conserving energy. It's kind of funny. Our brains take up a lot. Our biology uses a lot of energy, and we're always, as human beings, we're generally kind of lazy. And part of that is great because that means we're always searching for efficient ways of getting things done. I know I am, and the whole productivity movement in the self-help area is, they're really focused on that. And here, human beings are definitely focused on efficiency. We tend to take the diagonal. We'll go from point A to point B directly instead of meander back and forth on a path that meanders back and forth, because that's just the way humans are. We're definitely into conserving time and energy and money because those are limited resources. We don't have an infinite. I don't have an infinite amount of time. I don't have an infinite amount of energy, and I don't have an infinite amount of money. Very few people have that. So, there's this practical aspect where we're always conserving our time and energy. But I guess I wanted to highlight a flip side to that, as the whole story relates to happiness. Um, from my experience, I found that the less active I am, the less happy I am. There seems to be some kind of proportion, like a direct proportion between activity and happiness. And I think it relates to the brain in particular, and the body, and the relationship between the two. And I think our brain definitely wants us to be active, moving around, constantly doing things, and it rewards us with happiness when we are. And I know I feel when I go to the gym pretty regularly, and it's kind of funny. At first, I earlier in my life, I did not go to the gym. I had a hard time making it to the gym and doing things at the gym. It just wasn't for me, right? And but there, I went through a transition period. Well, and basically what happened is I just wasn't happy for a long period of time and needed to do something different. And eventually, I found exercise as being a source of happiness. I kind of just fell into it. Just generally, the culture uh, I mean, there are advocates in culture for exercise, but they're actually quite easy to dismiss. And I'm afraid I dismissed it. Um, there's so many forces in the world, in our cultures, that prompt us to stay still. Uh, at least for me, my work was a desk job. And so, I dutifully stayed at my desk. And when I got home, especially with kids, you're not necessarily out and about. You're typically at home, moving around, doing chores and doing regular stuff, logistical type things. And they're not the most active activities. They don't have to be, especially with young kids. A lot of it is quite stationary, and so at least for me, I felt bound, and because I was so inactive, I wasn't that happy, unfortunately. Even though I wanted to be a lot, enjoy that time period a lot. I don't know. It was really challenging. Eventually, I did find my way to exercise, and now I'm at the gym 3, 4 times a week, sometimes more often than that. And things have really turned around. My level of happiness has shot up. I've been able to maintain this at a very strong activity level for a couple of years now. And man, I'll tell you, it's made a huge difference. There's something about movement, exercise. It's powerful. And unfortunately, I noticed that even though the message is out there, right? It's out there in the cultural milieu, it's out there in the zeitgeist. It's definitely, the message is definitely out there. It's a drum that is continuously beating. A majority of people, I think, still are not quite appreciating the transformative effects of activity on the mind and the body. Now, like I mentioned, there are cultural forces. A lot of, like, I grew up around lots of TV sets, and today that's been replaced by time at the laptop or desktop computer, even time on the smartphone. And that time tends to be fairly stationary. And there's basically, there's so many activities that have multiplied that are quite quite honestly inactive activities. I mean, there's board games, and um, I mean, there's all kinds of things, even internet surfing, a lot of skilled type activities, skilled hobbies. I don't know, drawing or basket weaving, or I mean, you could, all kinds of activities, and that's wonderful, and there's a place for that. And it's easy to sort of heed the siren call because our natural body physiology wants to save energy. We love being efficient. And if we can have groceries delivered or our meals delivered, if we can have our clothes washed in an automatic washing machine or automatic dishwasher, then why not? And it's, I think those tools are wonderful to sort of give us more time during our day, and they're definitely needed. And unfortunately, these devices, this technology, does prevent us from moving as much as we probably ought to. And you know, it's easy to fall for the siren call of inactivity. I mean, inactivity is, there's something that draws people to it, and there's safety. It relates to safety. It relates to a sense of place. If you're active and moving around, that means you're going from hopping from place to place, doing things. And there are a lot of people who have personality traits that are introverted, and they don't necessarily want to leave their house, right? They don't necessarily want to meet up with other people. Um, and for a lot of reasons, for good reasons, they may be disabled. And you know what? They just may be uncomfortable. For a lot of reasons, there's a lot of good reasons to prefer solitude. Study, education is a really good example. I mean, that's a very laudable pastime, and there are a lot of teachers and students out there, professionals in their fields who are keeping pace with the world, and there are people who are enjoying activities, even like video games or watching movies. Watching movies is a really good example. Like, there's watching movies is so enjoyable for a lot of people. Watching TV shows, really, I mean, it's really beneficial for a lot of reasons. It expands creativity, expands one's sense in the world, it expands empathy quite often for others. And I mean, there's a lot of wonderful things to say about watching digital video or film video. It does all that. It really is wonderful. However, that activity is quite inactive. And there's exceptions. I mean, people could watch movies while working out in their living room, or watch a movie while they're, exercising at the gym or whatever. And there's a lot of ways in which watching a movie is a wonderful pastime. I mean, if you're sitting in a plane at 15,000 feet, there's really not much else to do besides sit in that chair. And it may be 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, or longer. I think watching movies is a perfectly fine thing to do. Please do. That sounds like a please do. Everyone is certainly invited to do so. That's the smart choice, right? Um, but of course, sort of the shadow of that is that you're sort of missing out on some activity that could conceivably make you happier. Um, and so we all have to be practical. We have to make practical considerations and practical trade-offs. And but happiness is not necessarily a factor. Like our future happiness, the happiness of our future self, is not something we consider quite often. I mean, if the movie that we're watching or TV show that we're watching is something we don't necessarily have to watch, um, and we're not constrained in any way necessarily, it in under some circumstances it might be a good time for a person to be active if they otherwise wouldn't be. And yeah, it's about supporting that future self, right? It's not easy to think of the future self. Like, for example, when I have a craving for a dessert, I'm not necessarily thinking about future me, who lives about a month into the future, where I'm carrying an extra 2 or 3 pounds, maybe an extra 5 pounds. I'm not, when I'm in the midst of a feeling of a craving for food, no matter what it is, like a food that's beyond what my maintenance plan is, I'm not necessarily thinking about my future self and its welfare. I'm in the moment, right? I'm in the present moment, and I'm desiring something, and I have the energy and will to desire it. I might go fetch whatever it is I'm desiring. And I can certainly justify it in the moment. And I also perhaps might not be thinking about my future self as much as I might want to. In fact, my future self might lament my past self's action, and I'm sure that happens all the time. It happens all the time to me as well. We're not easily reminded of our future self, you know, unless we have a plan, right? Unless we have a plan, or unless there's a habit that's been established or installed in our daily life, we won't necessarily get to know about the future self and their needs unless we have a plan for thinking about it, because it's really very easy to ignore. Yeah. So, but really, not only is it a plan to support our future self, but it's a plan to support our happiness long term. There's in the way there's like a short term happiness and long term happiness, and this idea of a long term happiness is sometimes it's quite vague. Um, it's not clear. Now, is it happy to be overweight and inactive? Is it possible to be happy under those conditions? Totally. So that's the challenge, right? I mean, it's totally happy. It's I mean, it's totally possible to be, and that's, I think, there's like a what I'd call, it's not black or white. It's I mean, it's possible to be very happy and still be very inactive. I mean, it's definitely true. It certainly had to have moments of happiness, but it is a little bit more challenging, right? It takes a little bit more skill, right? I think when it comes to attitudes, gratitude, That's what we're talking about is a psychological skill. And, you know, different people have different variations in their skill level relating to being happy, regarding being happy under different circumstances. And, you know, if a person has been inactive for a long, long time, and there might be challenges. There's a lack of mobility, a lack of flexibility, lack of health. It might kind of be harder to be happier than it might otherwise have been. And someone might not fully realize how their happiness is impacted by their inactivity. I know it's something it took me a long time to learn. It took me a long time to learn it. And I honestly, it took me years. I mean, I think I was easily past 40 years old before I fully understood the impact of exercise on happiness or activity on happiness. There's something that you sort of there's knowledge that a person can have, like theoretical knowledge, and they can have maybe they have knowledge that they don't necessarily apply or appreciate. I think that might be it. I just didn't appreciate it. And it really even took me to past age 45 to fully, deeply appreciate how activity contributes to energy, and having energy makes it easier to be happy. It's kind of interesting. Um, I kind of think of like if you imagine like a neutral attitude, like a 50 attitude where things are equally good or equally bad, in terms of your life circumstances and your attitude toward them. Um, that I would imagine that neutral sense is is quite common. I would imagine is quite common. It's something frequently that um, is natural. I think it's natural. It's not necessarily natural for a person to be 100% happy, just as it isn't natural for a person to be 0% happy. Um, it fluctuates and it's changing, and and but I think what it does take, if one chooses to be happier, and that's if they choose to be happier or want to be happier, or at least be more peaceful, or perhaps even just cheerful. Um, I think partly what it requires is energy. Energy, energy is required to be a little happier. It is definitely required, and having surplus energy, is part of what activity can provide. So, and that's partly, I think, why it's easier to be happy when you're energetic, when a person is active, because you just have the energy to expend, whereas you wouldn't necessarily have it. I mean, if a person had just the amount of energy that they needed in order to live an average, uh, sort of like to live at a level where they're uh, on average of a 50-50 style happy, that's pretty good. First of all, congratulations, kudos, because it's not easy to be happy in this world. I don't think it's that easy. It's like actually quite kind of a challenge with the media environment the way it is, the economic environment the way it is. I mean, if people are kind of surviving like at the 50-50 level, that's pretty darn good. If you're because let me tell you, there's a lot of folks who are lower than that threshold every day, and just to make it that high is pretty darn. I mean, as a human being, we still have our challenges in civilization. We haven't figured everything out yet, and yeah, there are a lot of challenges. So I mean, if you could make 50-50 level of happiness, that's fantastic. If you could just be average and zero, have a net zero type attitude, you know, that's pretty good. But I guess the point I'm wanting to make is that in order for a person to sort of increase a level of happiness to some higher level than just average, I think it requires energy to do. There's some there's an energetic nature to happiness. I mean, if you think about it, imagine your vision of a happy person. Well, one thing I can imagine is a person who's a little chipper, right? And in order to be chipper, in order to say smile in situations where a smile may not necessarily be required, a person requires physical energy. Like they need like an emotional surplus, they need a physical surplus, they need a surplus of energy. Their attitude, given the past, just might be fine. I mean, it might be 50-50 at the 50-50 threshold level. And that's okay, of course. But in order to go any higher, to go 51, there has to be a surplus of energy. I think there has to be a surplus of energy, a surplus of physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy. There has to be. If you were deficient in energy, then I'm not sure where that smile would come from. um, yeah, if there was even just having a lilt in the voice, right? Some energetic lilt requires additional energy. It may not be required for the situation. It may not be for maybe just a little bit of generosity toward the self or another. Again, that also requires a surplus. You have to have slightly more energy than the bottom necessary amount of energy. And I think the only way to obtain that surplus energy is through exercise. You just sort of have to be sort of more fit than the situation requires. Yeah, I mean, if you were less fit than the situation requires, imagine how you would feel when confronted with that situation. Well, there would be concern, right? And caution. There might be thinking and creating strategy. If you were definitely less fit, if you were not a match to the situation, what doesn't necessarily what necessarily prompt me to be chipper or energetic or positive. I mean, in fact, the opposite would be I would either be neutral in the best of cases or have a slightly, you know, somewhat negative attitude in terms of valence. Now, whatever that attitude would be, maybe it would be caution or whatever emotion word you want to use. So, I guess what I'm saying is, in order to be more fit than the situation requires, that is, and if you've chosen or you decided to be happier in the moment, you need the extra energy. You need it. You need to be fitter than the situation requires so that you can express that emotion in your body and in your voice. Express it in your emotional expressions. There's definitely, that's the only way to do it, really, I think. And I think it's dependent on energy level. And the only way to do that, the only way to increase energy level is to have the body adapt to expressing more energy. And the only way super adapts is through exercise or effort of some sort, where there's like an activity, and then there's sort of the getting tired, being aware of getting tired, and then a period of like super I forget what the word is, super accommodation or super adaptation, where later on you're actually more fit than the situation requires. Yeah, when you've got more energy than the situation requires, then you can be generous. I mean, you can be generous with your time and with your money. You could be generous with your with your patience, self-control. But the first thing it requires, and I think this is what's quite challenging for some, because I think generally good people who are at a mismatch physically to the situation may be perceived as, you know, um, people who are ineffective or people who are unkind, only because there's a mismatch between the situation and their physicality. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. If only their physicality were at par or above, um, then they might be considered or perceived to be more loving, empathetic, kind. Here's a good example. So I enjoy shopping at the grocery store. I like getting healthy produce at the grocery store. And so when I shop, I'm strolling my cart out to the parking lot to load my groceries into my car. And when I'm done transferring my groceries into the car, I move the cart into the cart holder, whatever that structure looks like. And sometimes I'll notice that other carts are not, they're sort of strewn around in the parking lot, which I fully understand. You know, there's a lot of people who are challenged, uh, physically challenged and mentally and emotionally challenged sometimes. I mean, everybody's got to eat, and they may have constraints on them for their time and energy and even money. And and they're just wanting to, they've hyped up the efficiency of their hyped up the efficiency of their actions, and many, and it's actually quite understandable. There are people that are hired, there are employees that are hired to actually clear the grocery carts from the parking lot. So in a way, it is, partly it's their job or not their job. It depends. That is the shoppers. They don't necessarily have to fulfill that particular duty, and I fully understand that. Um, but my point is that there are some who might judge, right? Um, those people who may have not returned their cards to the card holder, and whether they're justified or not, I'm not interested in having that debate. But what I am interested in is perceptions, and how a person might be perceived if they're in ill health, how they may be perceived as sort of, I don't know, unkind for not putting their shopping cart back into the slot. Um, I know this is like part of the thought process, but my only point is that, and people can have lots of different reasons for doing it, and I'm fine with all of them. I really am fine with all of them. Whether people put their shopping carts back at the end or not. But my only point in mentioning this example is that it's easier. It just happens to be easier. And the perception of others might be that one might be kinder. Now, it may not be that it's true. It is just a perception. It's a fiction in someone's mind, naturally. And, but my only point is that it's easier. It's easier to be perceived by others as being kind, loving, generous, when people are more fit than the situation requires, right? That is, that they have an overabundance or superabundance of energy. And I'm not saying it's true or whatever all the time, but it's just a probability. for some. I just don't want to overgeneralize here necessarily, but I do want to bring across my point. And then my point is that it's a little easier to be perceived as being kind if you have the energy. And it's a little bit easier to be perceived as positive and for you to perceive yourself as positive if you've got the energy to do it. And, we're not always in that position. Anyway, it just took me some time to sort of fully recognize that my goal shouldn't necessarily be to be just as fit as I need to be. My goal should be to be more fit. And the more fit that I am, the easier it would be through my behavior to be perceived as being nice or responsible or kind or loving or generous. And I don't know. And like I said, it took me a long time to sort of fully comprehend how energy relates to these societal judgments, right? And yeah, I think it's powerful, at least for me, when I fully realized that being perceived well, that um, even helping myself feel happier subjectively was both of those facts dependent on my physical fitness. And I mean, when I first realized that, I was like blown away. I mean, I kind of knew that already, but the connection wasn't that strong. It wasn't obvious until it was obvious. And like I mentioned, it took me about a half a century to fully realize. Because here's the thing, when I was a kid, I did little kid things. I mean, but as I grew up, um, inactivity took hold. It took hold strongly. And it was natural. It was natural in a lot of ways. Biologically, it's natural. Socially, it's natural. I mean, it's not necessary in our world, theoretically anyway, to grow your own wheat. Other people grow it for me. You don't have to build your own house. Other people build it for me. You don't have to build your own car. Other people build it for me. You don't even have to get your own food. Other people can get it for you. And these are sort of the luxuries of the modern world. And I urge people to take advantage of those luxuries because they're there and it's possible. But I guess there's like a golden mean aspect to it. It's powerful. Anyway, I guess that's all I wanted to mention today. I wanted to talk about the connection between activity and happiness and how many years it took me to understand it, and how I think that connection has helped made my life a lot happier and more enjoyable than it otherwise would have been. And I can speak that through personal experience. And I don't want to overgeneralize because I'm actually fine with a lot of what goes on in the world, and more power to them. We live in a really wonderful time in the world, and I'm just so grateful to be in it, along with everybody. I can't believe I'm still alive, honestly. And every day is a wonder and a miracle. Anyway, thanks for paying attention to me and my ramblings, and I wish you all the best. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I urge you to be kind to yourself and kind to others. Thanks.